The chair lays out Senate Bill 835 and recognizes its author, Senator Paxton, to explain the measure. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will be also laying out the committee sub.
Senator Paxton sends up the committee substitute, Senate Bill 835, and is recognized to explain the substitute and the differences.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members. Members, child sexual abuse is literally one of the most heinous crimes we in this body deal with. Most of us have children or grandchildren, nieces, nephews. Most committees that I have served on in this body have dealt with this issue in some way, tangentially. In education, we deal with it quite a bit. We've dealt with it in criminal justice and, of course, in this committee. I think part of what makes this particular crime so unthinkable is that most of the time, the abuser is actually a person that the child trusts. They hold a position in the child's life by which that child absolutely ought to be able to trust that person. This class of messages by abuse of this nature that is so invasive and so foreign to the mind and heart and person of a child, sexual abuse, creates a clash of messages about reality that creates a chaos within that child. And it is the very definition of trauma. Sexual predators not only portray themselves as trustworthy, but they often embed themselves in institutions that are highly trusted and respected. Religious institutions, youth-serving institutions, schools. And they do this, among other reasons, for two big reasons: to perpetuate and cloak themselves in the trust belonging to that organization, but also to increase their access to victims. This is a sickness in the very soul of a child sexual predator. Now, sometimes, thankfully, the abuser is discovered. And thankfully, many times, these institutions step in. Now, we would assume that the needed intervention would be obvious. To do justice and to show mercy. To do justice by holding the abuser accountable. And to show mercy by protecting and supporting the victim toward healing. But today, members, you are going to hear stories where this is not what happened, where the people and even the institutions who displayed themselves as trustworthy guardians of our children instead acted in complicity by covering up the horrific crime of child sexual abuse. Instead of protecting the victim, they chose to protect the abuser by protecting themselves. The mechanism, an NDA. While NDAs, or non-disclosure agreements, have many legitimate uses in business agreements, such as protecting trade secrets or sensitive client information, you will hear today how NDAs have also been used to silence childhood sexual abuse victims. This perverse application in such cases protects predators and the youth-serving organizations or religious institutions whose negligence actually enabled the abuse, and it further exploits the victims. And not only does this silence prevent justice from being served in the victim's specific case, if it could be worse, it is, because the absence of justice actually endangers additional children who may be future victims of that same perpetrator. Members, this bill seeks to eliminate and invalidate the usage of non-disclosure agreements to the extent that they force the silence of the voice of a victim in settlement agreements as they relate to the crime of child sexual abuse. Mr. Chairman, the committee substitute simplifies the language about what types of prohibited disclosures under an NDA are addressed by the bill. It clarifies that the bill shall not be construed to prohibit an agreement to keep confidential other provisions of a settlement agreement, including the amount or payment terms of a settlement or the victim's identity. It specifies that a person may only enforce an existing NDA that conceals sexual abuse if the person obtains a declaratory judgment that declares the NDA is enforceable. And it names the act Trey's Law, after Trey of Dallas, a victim of child sexual abuse and of a predatory NDA, who tragically took his own life after being silenced through this mechanism. His sister Elizabeth is bravely with us here today to share their family's story. I am so honored to carry this legislation in Trey's honor today. Members, telling the story is essential to the healing journey of victims of child sexual abuse. And the decision of how or when or where or with whom to share that story should be the decision of the survivor, not the decision of the abuser. The culture of silencing victims in the name of any other goal other than their healing must change in the state of Texas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members, for your consideration of this life-changing culture change for Texas. And Mr. Chairman, I also have the House bill to lay out.
Thank you, Senator Paxton. The Senate bill is still before us, and it will remain. Shortly we'll be hearing testimony, but we want to ask the sponsor of House Bill 748 to lay that out. So the chair lays out House Bill 748 and recognizes Senator Paxton to explain the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, members. Members, House Bill 748 is identical to the committee substitute language that I just laid out for Senate Bill 835 with an exception. The House bill applies to usage of these instruments regardless of the age of the victim. And I'd like to share that my exposure and introduction to this issue was in the context of specifically child sexual abuse. And that has been the interaction that I have had with victims as I've done my research on this bill. But I appreciate very much what the House bill does. Now, both bills, the House bill and the Senate bill, were both originally filed as exclusively applying to child sexual abuse victims. But the House version added a committee substitute at a certain point to include any victim, regardless of their age. And I think this is worth our consideration as well. And I appreciate your consideration as we listen to these witnesses today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members.
Thank you, Senator Paxton. Members of the committee, are there any questions for the author on Senate Bill 835 or the sponsor on House Bill 748 before we begin testimony? Senator Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Senator Paxton for bringing this forward. I think it's essential that we do this, and looking forward to the testimony and moving this legislation forward very rapidly. So thank you very much for bringing it forward, and looking forward to hearing, unfortunately, all this, the horrific tragedies of people that have suffered through this. We know that child sexual abuse is at epidemic levels. We know that it knows no boundaries. It affects everyone of every race, every creed, every religion, every ethnicity, poor neighborhoods, rich neighborhoods, everywhere. And it's a darkness that we must always call out. So I appreciate you so much bringing it forward, Senator Paxton, and look forward to the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Parker. And there are folks here in this chamber today that are here to testify because of their experience, and they're here sharing their stories. But we also know that there are people who are just here at work, coming to work, coming to listen, and there are people who are listening to the live stream of this and will listen to the recording of this in the future, that many of them are also victims of this. And it is a darkness, it is a sickness. And I believe you mentioned this the other day in another context in this committee, Mr. Chairman, but sunlight is the best disinfectant. And that really is what this bill is about. It is about removing away a mechanism that has been used, I think, illegitimately, not in the intended purpose, to shroud what is evil, and to allow for a continued darkness. I can't imagine. The folks here today are so courageous. I thank all of you for being here. Thank you, Senator. And thank you for authoring this with me. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Paxton. Thank you, Senator Parker. We'll open testimony on Senate Bill 835 and on House Bill 748. We have invited testimony, and the chair calls Joseph Cleveland, Susan Spencer, Joe Alarcon, Elizabeth Phillips, Cindy Clemishire. Welcome to each of you. If you have some documents to give us, the gentleman over here will help you with those. Welcome to each of you, and we're going to be recognizing you in turn. And when we do, just of course, introduce yourself and then give us your testimony. And then first, we'll begin with Ms. Phillips. And so get close to the microphone so we can hear you. Introduce yourself and go ahead. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Hughes and committee, for inviting our testimony today. I'm Elizabeth Phillips from Dallas, Texas. where I grew up and still live today. For today's purposes, I'm a certified crime victim advocate and the sister of Trey, for whom this public safety bill is named. A special thank you to our tireless Senate sponsor, Vice Chair Paxton, who personally knows Kanakuk victims, even a former student of hers living under an NDA. I also want to thank Senator Parker, who represents my district, as well as the many senators and House reps who have co-sponsored and supported Trey's law this session. When HB 748 author Representative Leach presented Trey's law to the House floor a month ago, it passed unanimously and now has 17 co-sponsors. That vote and message of overwhelming support honors the tragic loss of my late brother and the countless survivors of child sexual abuse like him who didn't survive. Sadly, a lot of truth dies with people because of NDAs, and that only protects bad actors, which is contrary to public interest. To me, that is the point of Trey's law and this hearing today. Public safety, protecting children, prioritizing life, liberty, and the pursuit of healing and happiness. Trey wasn't able to heal. He was silenced to his grave by Kanakuk Ministries, a Christian summer camp and global enterprise based out of Southwest Missouri. Texas has historically been among their largest markets. My brother had many layers to his journey of injustice. First, he was groomed and abused from age 7 to 17 by a serial sex offender who was sentenced to 3 life terms in 2010. Trey was 20 years old when Pete Newman went to prison. Then Trey was forced by the civil statute of limitations in Texas to file his civil case against Kanakuk before the age of 23, while he was just trying to finish college and process unimaginable trauma amidst a Christian culture applauding Kanakuk and hailing its CEO, Joe White, as a spiritual hero. Trey's civil case ended with a settlement that included a restrictive NDA, making Kanakuk and its representatives another perpetrator of abuse in Trey's tragic and unnecessary demise. Institutional abuse on top of sexual abuse. I have actually learned more about the extent of my brother's abuse since his death than I knew in his life due to the NDA he was under. Trey told a therapist they will always control me and I'll never be free before he died by suicide in August 2019 at age 28. He hesitated even to tell his story in confidential therapeutic settings for fear that Kanakuk would come after him again like they did an earlier John Doe. Since my family was public about Trey's abuse in his Dallas Morning News obituary, we've heard from so many other victim families with similar stories, some here today. Now that I know what I know, I'm trying to be a voice for Trey and countless other victims of sexual abuse and trafficking who are suffering in the shadows due to NDAs that restrict them from speaking in settings like this. If they could be here to testify without the threat of legal repercussions, there would be a line out the door. Some of the Kanakuk NDAs I've seen are multiple pages long. I'm going to share some short excerpts that have come to my attention by various survivors who are legally silenced to this day, so you can understand exactly the restrictions they live under into adulthood. Here's one. Plaintiff agrees to refrain from publicly criticizing, ridiculing, disparaging, or defaming any of the released parties or persons to any third party with or through any written or oral statement or image, including any statements made via websites, blogs, postings to the internet, emails, or social media at any time following the execution of this agreement. Another version states, the parties agree that neither party will make any written or oral statement portraying the other negatively. Any breach of this confidentiality clause shall constitute breach of this confidential settlement agreement and release, allowing the parties to seek damages for such breach. The releasers, the victims, have executed the same for the purposes and intents contained therein by their own free individual act and will. These are minor victims of childhood crimes. Until very recently, when some brave survivors broke their NDAs to speak with investigative journalists, dozens of Kanakuk victims believed that they were the only ones who had been abused there because the story barely reached the media. So when the floodgates opened and survivors coalesced around a petition asking Kanakuk to release victims from their NDAs, we garnered nearly 30,000 signatures in a matter of months. Kanakuk's initial response was a public statement and blatant lie that they do not use NDAs. Those of us who knew better called that out, so they said they do use NDAs, but it's only at the request of the victims. Survivors called out that lie, and Kanakuk changed their tune again, admitting in an open letter from Joe White that they use NDAs, but it's their insurance company that makes them do it, and in order to avoid repercussions, victims should not disclose settlement terms. Kanakuk won't come clean, and we're not giving them any more chances. With your help, we're going to change the law. The law on NDAs must be clarified because we cannot trust institutions to do the right thing. Facts About Kanakuk, an advocacy group launched by survivors in 2021, has since received continuous tips with hundreds of abuse allegations against more than 68 unique perpetrators associated with Kanakuk dating from 1958 to today. We learned about a new one just last week. The same family has been at the helm of Kanakuk throughout, while victims have been lawfully hushed by state-sanctioned NDAs Kanakuk and its insurers demanded behind closed doors with intimidating attorneys. That is exactly what led my brother to a psychotic break and a downward spiral thereafter. So for my family, it's no exaggeration for me to claim this as a matter of life and death. When you take someone's voice away, especially a child's, you take away their most linear path to healing. When you muzzle victims, kids, college kids, survivors of any age, it conceals important information from the public domain. Trey's Law should be a welcomed and minimum measure of justice so that future sexual assault victims do not have my brother's outcome. There's a quote that says, "Shame dies when stories are told in safe places." Tennessee made itself safer in 2018 when they became the first state to pass a bill prohibiting NDAs in civil child sexual abuse cases. Missouri is one signature away from doing the same. Trey's Law has passed the General Assembly there and is on the governor's desk. And 18 states, along with US Congress, have clarified the NDA issue for adult survivors of sexual assault. It's time we expand that to include children, and Texas can be a leader on this. Because NDAs have protected powerful people and institutions for a long time, there is widespread misinformation claiming that NDAs are actually in the best interest of survivors. I hope it is already clear to you that this is not the case, but I'm happy to clear up any misconceptions if there are questions. So to wrap this up, my focus and work is on the prevention of institutional child sexual abuse. So I support both bills that give victims their voices back. But I must emphasize that HB 748 is the strongest version of Trey's Law, with 0 no votes in the other chamber, and Texas can decide whether to lead or follow. I am myself a survivor of a sexual assault in college. And that's the first time I'm saying this publicly. I was a college kid when I endured that. So I personally feel strongly that the abuse of NDAs in any civil cases pertaining to sexual assault should be banned by law, and whomever opposes that has something to hide. NDAs, when weaponized in sexual assault cases, only protect bad actors. My request to this committee is whichever version you decide to go with, put that in the House bill and vote the House bill out promptly so we have a chance to get this to the governor's desk by deadline this session. I'm asking my home state to pass Trey's Law this session as an urgent matter of public safety. There have been 17 suicides associated with Kanakuk abuse known to date. I know Texas stands on the side of life. All emotion aside, this is just good policy. NDAs are for trade secrets, not trauma secrets. Full stop. Thank you for hearing me and the brave witnesses to follow. I'm prepared to take any questions.
And thank you for your testimony. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Now, we would, if y'all have a preference as to the order you wish to go in, otherwise I'll just go right to left around the table. Is that okay with y'all? Very well. Introduce yourself. Give us your testimony. Welcome.
My name is Cindy Clemishire, and I'm going to share my testimony with you. Thank you so much for having me and including me in this opportunity to change our laws and protect children. I grew up in Hominy, Oklahoma, and I was groomed and abused beginning at the age of 12 and continued for 4 more years. I finally told someone when I was 17 years old. Robert Morris was a traveling evangelist at the time from Texas and later became the founding pastor of Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas. He and his wife and children stayed in our home when he was preaching at my church. They quickly became family friends, people my parents and others in my community trusted. My abuse started on Christmas night, December 25th, 1982, when I was 12 years old. That was the night he made the premeditated decision to violate and defile my innocence and purity. I want to be clear so you understand exactly what we are talking about. This man, trusted by so many as a preacher of God's word, took advantage of a vulnerable child. I was wearing my favorite pink pajamas with bloomers. He touched me in a way that under Oklahoma law is classified as rape by instrumentation. The word rape often brings to mind brutality, but these predators are calculated. They don't just groom the child, they groom the parents and others around them to gain access. The abuse is often subtle, gentle, not to protect the child, but to keep the child confused and quiet. When Robert finished his first assault on me, the very first thing he said to me, and I quote, "You can never tell anyone because it will ruin everything." This continued countless times over the next 4 years until I finally told someone in March of 1987. Sadly, when I did tell, it seemed as though Robert was right. It did ruin everything in my world. Friendships ended, marriages of mutual family friends fell apart. My relationships with others changed instantly. And at just 17 years old, I thought it was all my fault. As I began the lifelong journey of dealing with the aftermath of child sexual abuse, my life seemed to attract more shame, while Robert's attracted more fame. I was in and out of marriages, spent over a decade in counseling, and tried to find healing through various churches and seminars. I was searching for understanding, for peace, and for forgiveness. By 2007, 20 years after the abuse ended, I realized I could potentially receive some form of financial restitution. My attorney sent a demand letter for $50,000, just enough to cover the cost of counseling. His attorney responded not with compassion, but with a letter accusing me, a 12-year-old child at the time, of pursuing him. They countered with $25,000, but only if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I was 37 years old at that time. I refused. There was no way I would ever sign something stating I could never speak about my own life. Had I agreed to that NDA, Robert would have continued to have power over me. Instead, I kept telling people, I kept seeking truth, and I kept healing. Because I refused to sign that NDA at 37, I am able to sit here today at 55 years old and share my story in hopes of helping others. In March of this year, March 12th of 2025, my abuser was indicted by the Oklahoma grand jury on 5 counts of lewd acts with a child. This is what happens when survivors are not silenced. NDAs may be presented as legal formalities, but in cases like mine, they are tools that continue the abuse. They protect the abuser and keep victims in shame. They prevent the children from being protected, and they make it harder to stop abuse from happening again. The only way to have a chance at ending child sexual abuse is to tell the truth, to speak it, to share it, and to expose it. When NDAs are used to silence victims, we are not protecting families, we are protecting the people destroying them. So I leave you with this. Anyone who doesn't support this bill or waters it down or prevents it from being passed, we should be asking, who are they trying to protect and why?
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for being here. Welcome, introduce yourself, and go ahead.
Thank you, committee, for having me. My name is Joe Alarcon. I am from Amarillo, Texas, and I am definitely in support of these bills, especially HB 748, Trey's Law. I come as a father to a victim. My son, Ashton. I told somebody one time that as we prepare for testimonies like this, that it comes at a price. That in order for us to change the future, we have to go back to our past. And the past is hurtful. The past is hard to deal with and it's hard to recognize. But the reality is that those of us who do have voice, I feel like we have a responsibility and an opportunity to speak for those who do not have their voice. I'm here today because of my son, Ashton. He is a survivor and one of countless victims of Pete Newman and the leadership of Kennecott camps, including Joe White. Pete Newman was a serial predator at Kennecott camps and was allowed to abuse children for over a decade. And he was enabled by people in power, men like Joe White, the founder of Kennecott. I know this not from hearsay, but from firsthand evidence. I sued Kennecott. I possess Pete Newman's personnel files. I have the video depositions of Joe White, Doug Goodwin, and others trying to explain and justify why they let the abuse continue. In one of those depositions, Joe White, he said, "The reports of abuse were drops in a cascade of good." That is how he described the abuse of my son. A drop, a casualty, something small and forgettable in the face of all the good they believed that they were doing. How sick is that? After learning of Ashton's abuse, my family's soul folks became his healing. Ashton was once a joyful, radiant young man, full of light. That light was dimmed that day by Pete Newman whenever he targeted my son. And what haunts us is knowing his abuse could have been prevented. What many don't understand is that the abuse doesn't stop with the victim. It ripples through the entire family. Three years ago, I lost my son, Preston, Ashton's younger brother. Preston carried his brother's pain, his anxiety and depression in silence. My son, Preston, did not recover from his anxiety and sadness. One of my most treasured memories of Ashton, he was just 4 years old, gently carrying his little baby brother, Preston, into our room one night because he was worried about him. From that moment, I knew Ashton had just met his best friend and his little brother. And Preston did not survive it. Why am I here today? Because I can. Because my family refused to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. We refused to be silent. However, that decision came at a steep price. After we refused to sign the NDA, Kennecott came after us, came after me personally. They filed motion after motion in federal courts attempting to sanction me personally, to force us into silence, to bury the truth beneath legal threats and financial ruin. They even tried to make us pay over $20,000 in their legal fees. They were relentless, and Joe White was very intentional about making sure that we would never be able to tell our story. But Judge Fish repeatedly ruled in our favor. Still, their lawyers kept coming, twisting the narrative, just like Joe White did when he allowed Pete Newman to prey on children. So I ask you, should any family have to go through that just to protect their child? Should victims have the right? Should victims have to fight not only their trauma, but also institutions and lawyers bent on silencing them? Should any family and victims be treated with so much disrespect? and their abuse be treated like a business deal? No. Victims and families should be supported so that healing can take place. I stand here today not just for my son Ashton and not just for my son Preston. I stand for the victims of the future, children who, as of today, have not been abused. Let me say that again. I stand for the victims of the future, children who, as of today, have not been abused. That is a sobering reality. Just saying that breaks my heart. Some of them will become addicts, many will become depressed, and some will not make it. You have the power right now to pass a law that protects their voice, a law that ensures NDAs cannot be used to cover up abuse. A law that says, in Texas, predators and the people who protect them will not be shielded by secrecy. In closing, I speak to you not only as a grieving father, but also as someone who has stood up to the institution. I speak to you as a man who still believes in justice. In a minute, you're going to be able to hear from my son, Ashton. You're going to hear from a graduate of Columbia Dental School in New York City, a captain in the United States Air Force who is currently stationed in Misawa, Japan, fighting for my freedom and your freedom. He is living proof that healing is possible when victims are given their voice. My son is a survivor, a warrior, and a light in this world only because he refused to be silent. Please pass HB 748. Protect our children, honor our families, and ensure that no more light is stolen in the name of justice. In the name of silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alarcon. Thanks for your testimony. Ms. Spencer, welcome. Introduce yourself and go ahead.
My name is Susie Spencer, and my father actually was a pastor.
Get a little closer to the mic because we want to be able to hear you. This is
Yes.
important. Thank you.
So, my name is Susie Spencer, and my father was a pastor. My mother was a church secretary, and when I was 3 years old, my mom gave me over to him. She said she was tired of being raped herself, and I took her place. I was not the only one that was abused by my father. Throughout Texas here, in different churches where we bounced around, many other kids were mistreated, and teenagers. They met when they worked at Lester Roloff's down in Corpus Christi, and their goal was to help troubled teens, but instead they ended up hurting them. It took quite a long time for me to overcome the fear and the shame and the pain to be able to come forward and go to the police over the stuff that they did. I actually was only 40 when I finally went to the police, and I found out that the statute of limitations had passed. They could not investigate, and even for civil suits. I was too old, really, for Texas to care. So what I do now is I'm here to help and be a voice for other survivors. My goals are prevention, accountability, and recovery for justice. NDAs like this for these civil suits, it really ends up aligning themselves with the perpetrators. People like my dad who told kids that they had to be quiet, that they had to be secret, that what was happening they couldn't talk about. And I do not believe that this is what should be done for healing, for care, for survivors, for people like me and so many of us here. As a mother now, my kids actually are here today with me, and we teach them that if something bad happens, you tell an adult. You do not keep it silent. You talk. You tell them. And what type of message are we sending with these NDAs that says that adults can keep their bad stuff hidden? It's not right, and it's not fair, really. So I just ask you today to support Trey's law. And with the Senate bill and the House bill, however it happens, just to know that there are people that to be able to speak up and talk and share their story, it is very healing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you for your testimony. Welcome. Since you're on the end of the table, get close to that mic and introduce yourself and go ahead.
Good morning, Senators. Most of you have already heard my story, so I'll keep this a little short. My name is Joseph Cleveland, and I live in Huntsville, Texas. And my senator is Senator Schwartner on this committee. In 2004, at the age of 15, I was introduced to a man who was a pedophile. This man had begun grooming me and would eventually begin molesting me. This happened once or twice for the rest of high school and continued until I was the age of 24. Little did I know this man was already working alongside a college ministry called Chi Alpha and the Assemblies of God Church for at least 2 decades and had already molested other boys, for which he had served 90 days in an Alaska jail for that. Pastors in our ministry tried to convince students, many of whom were also victims, to write letters of lenience on behalf of the survivor, on behalf of the abuser. When I was abused in 2005, the statute of limitations in Texas at the time were until the age of 23. At the age of 23, I was still being molested by this man. For a significant amount of time, the leadership in the Assembly of God, which was the denomination I had been a part of, knew that this man was a registered sex offender, did not take the needed steps to rid our ministries of him. I was one of the first victims to come publicly forward in 2023, and for nearly 20 years, I had told no one, not even my wife, who is here. Myself and 5 friends, some of them even pastors in the Assembly of God and other victims, started to call our friends, figuring that there had, of course, been other men who had been abused. We heard for about 6 months dozens of stories, and we ended up finding over 40 victims, most of which have no intention of ever coming forward. They just want to move on with their lives and, move off in peace. The majority of these men also will never see justice because they were technically adults when it happened because they were college students. We then all watched in horror as NDAs were used to insulate the organizational leadership, to cover themselves, to use NDAs as a fog of ignorance to hide behind it. Because of this, justice has not been served in a lot of cases. Since then, the Assemblies of God has even tried to dismiss valid civil claims of negligence, has sidelined victims like myself and others in the investigation process, and have still even tried to use NDAs against minor victims who are still minors to this day. My wife and I have a rule in our house with our kids. No secrets. The night before the House Committee meeting for Trey's Law, I was talking to my 8-year-old daughter in kid language, explaining to her the process of NDAs. And she said, if you keep it secret, doesn't that bad person keep hurting children? And she's 100% right. An 8-year-old understands that. My request today is, of course, that we pass Trey's Law for children and adults, because I am in both of those categories, that this bill would allow the accountability and justice to take place, that it will not allow organizations and leaders to plead agnosticism in the face of these unspeakable crimes. Thank you, committee.
And thank you for your testimony. We thank each of you, and we're going to have some questions for you, so if you don't mind staying with us and helping us get the full picture. Senator Paxton, you have the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you, all of you, for being here today and telling your story and helping those of us who have been fortunate enough not to go through this experience to understand it better. And as I say that I know people who have gone through these things, and I just don't know. The day I filed this bill, back in the spring, I went back to Dallas and I had dinner with a friend who I've known for 30 years. And as we were walking into the restaurant, my friend said, "Thank you for filing that bill. That happened to me." We've talked about all sorts of things, and it's not a lack of trust between us. It's hard to talk about, but it's different, don't you think, to choose when to talk about it, and you may choose not to, and to be unable to talk about it. And that's what I've heard you say. I wanted to just ask a couple of questions. Elizabeth, one of the questions that as I've been working on this issue and talking to lots of people, because I want to understand it fully, one of the things that has been asked of me or said to me is that there are victims who want to do an NDA. And Cindy, you explained that you did seek to recover some damages to pay for counseling and everything. But the price of that was your silence.
Right.
So I wonder, maybe both of you could maybe respond to that there are people who want to sign an NDA because they do want to recover damages. Isn't that just a choice, and doesn't that actually help them? And I wonder if you could both respond to that.
I'm not surprised you've gotten that question. It's actually one of our FAQs, and I brought those materials for the committee. So yes, we're talking about the misuse of NDAs. There are proper uses of NDAs, for example, to protect the Coca-Cola recipe or other IP, trade secrets, for security reasons, when you don't want to give everyone your house alarm code, for example. There should be the opportunity to keep certain things confidential in contracts. However, it may sound good in theory to say survivors should be able to request a mutual NDA in a civil settlement agreement. But this approach plays out in a way that has led to opposing parties agreeing to settle only if the plaintiff requests an NDA. It has created additional challenges for minor victims, especially if they ever seek relief from an NDA, since it appears they requested it to begin with, even when they were coerced or minors and didn't understand what was being signed on their behalf. So victims should be able to have a unilateral confidentiality provision to protect their names and whatever settlement terms they want to keep confidential. What they choose is important to keep confidential. But it can't go both ways and protect the bad actors. And it's been used as, the misuse of NDAs have in practice been used to intimidate victims into requesting an NDA. And that, again, I used the line earlier, Kanakuk even tried to say, oh, we do use NDAs, but it's at the victim's request. And that's a manipulation. So the way that these bills have been drafted is hopefully to clarify and address that we are seeking to allow victims to have the freedom to decide what is kept confidential or not. That should be their choice and their freedom.
And to be clear, members, the bill is very clear to say that there is complete freedom to keep certain elements of an agreement to settle confidential, such as the name of the victim, the identity of the victim. Most people are not wanting to go on the evening news. They just want to pursue their healing. But they need some help to do that. And so there's nothing in the bill to prohibit keeping terms of the contract confidential. But the one thing that is prohibited is silencing, it coming at the cost of the silence of the victim. Thank you, Elizabeth. Cindy, did you have anything to add to that?
I think it's got to be understood that we've said it multiple times, but talking about what happened is the hugest part of the healing journey. I have spoken about my abuse with counselors, with my friends, with my family, just trying to understand it better. And I don't believe that anyone, even in their 20s, if they are faced with signing an NDA, they may, because they're still living in so much shame, think that that's okay because they don't want anyone talking about them. But the reality is, every decade in life, we change and we understand more of the crime that was committed against us, and silencing any part of that completely prevents full healing. I don't know, I think it's a lifelong journey. I think I still have more to go. But even in the last year since this story became public, the information I've received that has helped me, the countless number of victims that have reached out to me and told me thank you, and hearing their stories and realizing I'm not alone. Everything I've gone through, everyone else has too. So whatever the verbiage is, I just want people to understand that silencing at any age of any child sexual abuse, it's just another roadblock.
You know, as you were telling your story, Cindy, I thought about something that I'd never thought about before. But we all know these stories. You said that on that first terrible incident with Robert Morris, that when he finished, he said, "You can never tell." That is textbook sexual predator. And we all know this, and I imagine anyone here who is a parent has probably told your children, if anyone ever tells you, you can't tell me, you better tell me.
Right.
That means, that's code for tell me, right? And so in a certain sense, he imposed upon you, a child, a verbal NDA. Mm-hmm. Not a written NDA, but a verbal NDA. And everyone in this chamber understands the power that has, certainly over a child. But there are people here who, as adults, have been told that in various settings. We all know that something is wrong when someone tells you you can never tell. It doesn't matter what it's about. And sir,
Yes,
thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward also to hearing the testimony of your son.
thank you.
I have a daughter who was a captain in the Air Force.
Awesome, love it.
You know, you mentioned this is not just a tort. This is not just a tort. And I can't imagine the pain of hearing someone describe the most devastating thing as a drop in a cascade of good, as if somehow that makes it okay.
Right.
Thank you for sharing your story. All of you, your courage is tremendous, and I believe with all my heart, as a believer, I mean, I know that, Mr. Chairman, we've talked about this, senators, we've talked about this, but for those of us who are believers, this is an atrocity that is unspeakable, that people would use spiritual authority as a guise and a means to hurt. And what you're doing today will set people free, and because the truth sets us free. Yes, sir.
I was just wanting to, you asked a really great question because I want to speak to you as a father who dealt with that very issue whenever people ask a question, well, what if somebody wants an NDA? Real quick, in that moment, in that time, me and my family, we were not in a place of even knowing what we wanted and what to do. This is the time for the state to stand up for us. This is the time for the state to say, that is not good business. It's not smart. Today, you're in shame. Today, it's embarrassing. Today, it's hurtful. Today, you do not have voice. But there will be a day where you're going to need your voice. My response is when people ask that, I ask that the state of Texas preserve my voice until I find my voice and am willing to use my voice. If I choose not to use it, that's my choice. However, please preserve it, because Kanakuk and their attorneys, they came after us hard. I'm a lay person. I don't know what being sanctioned or in a federal court, whenever I'm being sanctioned in a federal court, that's scary because you're left up to the courts as to what's going to happen to you. My prayer is that families do not have to go through what I went through. And at the time, the only reason I did not sign that NDA in that moment was because of my son Ashton. It wasn't because of me. I'll be honest. At the time, I think I was okay, because who would want to tell this story? That is my state of mind then, but that's not my state of mind today. And if I would have signed that NDA, I would not be able to stand up for those who cannot tell their story. I would be just like them. But my son Ashton said, Dad, I want to be able to tell my story one day. Not today, but maybe one day. And that was wisdom of a 14-year-old boy. So that's my request. Protect our voice. Let the law say, no, that's not allowed, because there will be a day when you're going to need your voice.
And so, all of you, is it your testimony that being able to tell your story is at the center of healing?
Yes.
100%.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Did you want to add something to that?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Paxton. Senators, any other questions? Senator Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, thank you all so very much for being here. Thank you for your bravery, for being heroes and bringing light to this darkness. I'm so sorry for all that you individually have suffered, your loved ones have suffered, and our goal is to make it right. I want to expose some of this darkness a little further, if you allow me to, specifically talking about Kanakuk for a moment. Would you mind sharing us this horrific predator that did this to your brother Trey, that did this to your son Ashton? Where is that individual today, and what is the position right now of Kanakuk? And I'm just absolutely so angry and furious to hear how they attacked you, came after you maliciously. And something that's supposed to be, obviously, as Senator Paxton referenced earlier, have a spiritual component, I guess, to what it's supposed to be about. And the utter disregard for human life and for the suffering of your loved ones. So would you just give us an update on that? I want to understand that for a moment a little deeper, if I could.
I'll speak to as far as Kanakuk and Joe White, and maybe, there's been zero accountability for Joe White, for Doug Goodwin, and for the board and all of leadership. The same leadership that allowed my son to be abused is still in leadership today and at large. There has been zero accountability. Joe White and his staff has been able to be very strategic in controlling the narrative, including the Attorney General, including the law enforcement there, that there was no sexual crime that has ever been taken place. So therefore, a failure to report was not enforceable. Then whenever it did become enforceable, or people started to leave office, new people come in, statute of limitations expired. So therefore, Joe White at this point in time is clear when it comes to statute of limitations, because from the beginning of Pete Newman's tenure, he was caught already doing these things, sexually abusing kids at the beginning, which is in his file, which I have in his personnel file immediately. But Kanakuk's strategy and Joe White's signature was, we're going to try to rehab this guy right here, because it was just a bad decision that he made. So for 10 years, he's been trying to correct his behavior, and foolishly, they even documented part of this strategy. So nothing has ever taken place. They're still at large. Legacy and tradition has played a huge part in their still being in existence today.
May I add to that?
Please.
And thank you for the question. No one has been terminated as a result of Pete Newman's crimes. 2 years after Pete Newman was indicted on multiple felony counts, there was another perpetrator at Kanakuk arrested for abusing 5 boys. And yet they tout themselves as having the gold standard in child protection plans. It's actually on the approved list of trainings under Jenna's law in Texas. And so they've done a really good job of protecting and preserving their reputation. They've used legal tactics to buy enough time so that victims are out of statute. In Missouri, the civil statute runs out at the age of 26 to sue an institution, age 31, a direct perpetrator. Pete Newman himself is in prison for 3 life terms in Missouri, but under the Missouri Criminal Code, he was up for parole last September. Kanakuk didn't do anything about that, but survivor families like the Alarcons, myself, and an army of others rallied opposition to Pete Newman's parole. So it has been on survivors to bring this to light. Kanakuk continues to minimize the scope and scale of the abuse. It was not just one bad apple 12 years ago, which is what their website still says. And so this is something that has to be brought to light, because just because an organization has a cross on its logo does not mean that it's safe for children.
Thank you for that, and I could not agree with you more. And it's the author of Jenna's Law to Protect Children from Child Sexual Abuse in this state and this country now. I'm utterly disgusted to hear that of all the different trainings, and there's hundreds, if not thousands of them, that they're on the list, and I certainly will address that. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Thank you.
And, I think it's also so clear, I think in hearing the testimony from all of you collectively, the multi-generational impact that it has, the impact that it has on the family is unbelievable, and how it affected your family and your son, that just was so close to his brother that he saw the suffering and wasn't able to break the cycle, the pain. It's just horrific. And you see the correlation between the necessity of, as Senator Paxton said, being able to talk about it, to be able to heal. And the fact that this vehicle, these NDAs, silence these innocent victims and do nothing but protect the predator is just disgusting. And so Texas needs to lead. We need to get this done right. And again, I'm so grateful to each of you for sharing your story. And it's just incredible. You all are heroes for all of us in modern society to talk about what's going on. The only way we break the stigma is to talk about it. So thank you for what you're doing. God bless you all. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Can I add on to what they said?
Please.
In the same situation in the Assemblies of God, it's been the same situation since, like me and the other guys brought this forward. The district leadership here in Texas with the Assemblies of God has kept it really quiet. They've had closed-door meetings that even pastors had, if they wanted to be in the meeting, they had to sign an NDA to be a part of the meeting.
Wow.
Or for fear of losing their jobs, which I don't blame them for the pressure of, like, what do I do, sign an NDA or not have a job? Like, I don't blame them for signing it. And then the national leadership, when this like kind of hit the news a little bit, the superintendent of the Assemblies of God described it as a hiccup. It's a local event. It's just one university, but there was 40 adult men over 6 different college campuses, and there's like multiple lawsuits. There's multiple criminal charges. And the abuser, for me and many others, is in jail right now in Waco, awaiting trial this summer. So it's a pattern of, it's a playbook that they use.
So sorry.
Silence.
So they, as an organization, they've not acknowledged it. They're just dismissing it, trying to fight it in the courts. And
They have the very lawyerized statement on their website. But other than that, like I tried to go to business meetings to bring attention to other pastors in the denomination who had no idea what was going on because nothing was said to them. And at one meeting, I was shouted down, and I said I was out of order. Pastors told me to sit down, and all I was trying to do was just tell them what happened. So.
So sorry. And then I think also one other element, I think about your brother, Elizabeth, and that it was 10 years from the time that he was abused, that 10 years of suffering, that not being able to talk to a counselor, not being able to talk openly and freely is what exacerbated the pain and anguish. I mean, year after year, it just accelerated and got worse because of this damn NDA. So I recognize it. I see what's going on. Thank you for, again, bringing clarity to what's happening and allowing us to be able to do the right thing here. Thank you.
And thank you, Senator Parker. Senator Paxton, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick point. Joseph, you reminded me of something that you shared with me about the use of NDAs with employees. And that's not something that we were talking about, but this is another misuse of this tool. Are you saying basically that employees were required to sign an NDA as a condition of continued employment?
I don't know about that specifically, but there was one, he's called a presbyter. He's over kind of like a section of churches in Texas, and he said to enter the door in the meeting, before they even knew the topic of the meeting, there was a team of lawyers that they had to sign an NDA before they even knew what the topic was.
I think the use of this tool, which is a business tool, it's fine. It's neutral, and it has good uses and bad uses like any tool. But even as a means of intimidation, I think, among employees in an organization, to keep people silent. And again, I'm just so reminded of what I've told my own children, what my parents told me. If someone tells you, do not tell, you cannot talk about this, something is wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We thank each of you for being here. In a moment, the committee is going to have to stand in recess so that the Senate can come into session. We have a number of folks who want to testify, who we want to hear from, and we will. Everybody gets to tell their story. That's important. And we're here for that. And so I'm going to ask our invited witnesses if you'll stick around for a few minutes so the members of the committee can greet you, if you'll hold tight for just a moment. And again, for those wishing to testify on this bill or a couple other bills we have, the committee will be coming back here after the Senate recesses or adjourns this afternoon. So you've got some time if you need to step away and take care of business or eat some lunch. But when the Senate adjourns or recesses this afternoon, the committee will be coming back again for the other witnesses who want to testify. And again, we'll ask you guys to stick around just a minute so we can visit with you. And thank you. And with that, if there's no other business at this time, before the committee, we stand with great thanks to our committee team and the Senate team that keeps us going, and for each witness testifying and remaining to testify, the committee stands in recess up to the call of the chair. Good morning.